Hello and welcome to another episode of Disc and Dice. My name is Tim, and joining me as always is my co-host Paul.
Hello, as always.
And we have a first-time guest today, long-time friend JT. How are you, mate?
Not too bad, Timmy. How you going?
I've been well myself. Thank you very much. Such a polite guest, JT.
Yes, bit different from real life, isn't it?
I'd have to say, compliments to this guy's parents. They have really raised a lovely young man.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I'm just going to assume that they're listening, just really supporting you in all your endeavors.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sure you've sent off a invite over Facebook to them and they have no idea what it is. But knowing my dad, he's probably just accepted anyway.
Maybe we'll have them on the show next week. Hey?
Yeah, I can set that up. Easy.
Line it up. Hey, look, we don't normally talk news and current events on this, but it would be remiss of us, a gaming podcast, not to at least mention E3, which has passed since the last episode. Did you guys happen to catch anything interesting?
I did. I watched quite a lot of the content from that. I tend to every year. I sort of try to watch kind of all the announcements and releases just to see if there's anything interesting. What kind of struck me this year was how little of substance there was, like a lot of cinematic trailers and not much gameplay kind of across the board, which was a bit disappointing. Maybe it says more about the state of E3 and its relevance now, but yeah, that was sort of my general takeaway.
Yeah, I suppose like it didn't help that like Sony, one of the biggest kind of contributors, wasn't there this year. But I tend to think like even in the past couple of years, like I struggle to feel like it's substance even when there's a lot there, because you get so many cinematic trailers for games that they're like, and this is coming out in 3 years, and you're like, is what I just saw even going to be remotely what the game is like? Is it going to get pushed back? Is it doing a No Man's Sky and promising the world, and it's going to not have any of those things? So I'm pretty skeptical in general. To me, it's as satisfying as, seeing the trailers before whatever movie you're actually going to see.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's interesting, but I don't put too much stock in it. But that's just me. I know some people are getting up at 3 a.m. over here in Australia to watch it. I'm happy just to kind of hear what the buzz was about and search out specific things.
Yeah, it's I think we were sort of talking about this the other day, in regards to just how marketing centric it's become. Now I know that it's always been a way for developers and publishers to market their games, but it's now getting to the point for me when I watch it, it's like I have to take everything they say with a grain of salt, because it's like, again, like you said, the No Man's Sky situation, I guess, was sort of a bit of a warning to gamers to, basically watch out what they're buying. Watch out what they're buying in the future based on what's sold at E3.
Yeah, I did wonder whether there's been a bit of a backlash in, I don't know, maybe the last like 5 or more years over the kind of vertical slice gameplay demos that you get at E3, and then when the final product doesn't really represent it. So I know Watch Dogs was a big one for that, and even our Lord and Savior Witcher 3 copped a bit of criticism for a similar kind of thing. And I don't know, maybe it's entirely possible that publishers and developers just kind of don't care, but I did wonder whether maybe they're a little bit more hesitant to show one of those like segments of gameplay 2 years out from release when they know it will change, possibly.
But I mean, like, you'd think that the showcase, as on the whole, would be learning that, right? Like, I would much prefer if the organizers of E3 made a blanket rule that you can't show any game that doesn't have a release date within the next 2 years. Like it would have never happened, because it's all about the hype and whatnot, and they kind of, it's as much a testing ground for the developers and stuff. But like, I would love it if everyone kind of held themselves to a higher standard and decided not to show things that they weren't 100% confident was going to be in their finished product.
Yeah, like One thing, actually, I'm glad that you guys brought up the whole E3 thing for this, because I was actually reading an old magazine that some people might remember called PC Power Play.
Oh yeah.
I found one from
Oh.
I found one from 1996. I was at my mum's house, and thank you, Mum, for keeping that, because I needed the kick of nostalgia.
Just
But
want
at
to
the
point out
very
here,
front
this
of
is more compliments for JT's parents.
The Real Heroes of Disc and Dice, episode 18.
Yes. I'm really just here as an ambassador, basically. But right at the front of of PC Power Play, I think it was number 12 or something. It actually had a recap of E3 from then, and it was the third E3 ever. And you can tell that it was just completely different. I mean, obviously you would expect it to be after this many years, but back then it really, really was less about marketing the game, I guess, illegitimately, and much more about pushing what the actual game was about. So it's definitely changed, and as the gaming industry has changed over the years, that's to be expected. But it was just kind of mind blowing to see that it was completely different back then.
I suppose that's the natural progression, right? Like, it starts out that way, and then somebody drops a trailer that sets the world on fire. So everybody's aiming for that, and so they start, getting more and more grandiose, and perhaps having less in common with reality. But
And once the
that's probably
internet
going to,
is sort
yeah.
of so ubiquitous as well, I guess it becomes less that you show things at E3 because everyone's watching, because now it's like everyone's watching all the time.
Yeah, I suppose in that PC Power Play magazine from what was it, 96 or whatever, like E3 at that point was, much more for industry people and journalists and actual proper, reviewers and whatnot. Now it's pretty much aimed directly at the fans because they know the whole thing's going to be streamed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
sure, Kotaku and IGN and every web publication is going to like share their articles and their thoughts, and there are closed stuff for reviewers and media personnel, but in general I'd say people are focusing on getting those pre-orders now.
Speaking that closed behind doors kind of stuff, one of the games that I know all three of us are looking forward to is Cyberpunk 2077, which they dropped
Yes.
a nice little trailer again. We can talk about Keanu Reeves all day, but we probably don't need to. And I've heard another gameplay demo that was sort of equally impressive like last year, which I think they said they're going to release in a few weeks or a month or something like that at maybe PAX. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, was there anything in particular that stood out to you guys in terms of specific games from this year?
I mean, like, I just wanted to really quickly say about Cyberpunk, I love that they kept the Keanu Reeves thing under wraps for so long.
Mm.
I almost wish like they kept it under wraps so well for so long that I almost wished like they didn't show it now. Just like when the game fires up and there's Keanu, but like at least it took them this long, Like in movies in general and stuff, I hate how much we know now, like years before the film comes out, like what's coming up on the slate and all of that. So little surprises like that are nice. That was also probably like the biggest one for me. I was really pumped about that Dragon Ball Z game that's coming out though, because I'm a massive Dragon Ball Z fan, and pretty much all of the Dragon Ball Z games that exist um, over the last few years at least have all been just fighting games, and this is more kind of like an RPG, and you're in a three-dimensional world and you can wander around and do all sorts of stuff. So who knows if it's going to be any good? But the last RPG we got with Dragon Ball Z characters was on Super Nintendo and was never officially released in the West. So I'm pumped for this.
Yeah, and another game that I was sort of interested in seeing a bit more about was the new Uncharted game. Sorry, I mean Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
I wanted to talk about this as well.
That was one of those games that I liked watching the gameplay. It looks great. It's EA know how to make a good looking game, but the whole time I was watching, I was just thinking it really did look like a bit of an Uncharted game with a Star Wars skin. I think they put in all those same mechanics and whatnot, but who knows? Maybe when the game comes out, it's going to be a bit more surprising. They obviously have to show off what the fans want. So
Yeah, I got massive Force Unleashed vibes, more so I'd say from it. Like I felt like this, if if the whole Star Wars canon hadn't been rebooted and rebranded, then this would just be the next Force Unleashed game. But I don't know if you guys have followed it, but they released an extended gameplay demo like a couple of days ago. Maybe it was just yesterday, which is about twice the length, perhaps, or maybe not quite that, but quite a bit more than what was shown in that initial demo. Because a lot of the reports coming out of E3 were that when people saw it behind closed doors, it was very different to what they showed at the presentation. That it's a lot kind of slower and more methodical, and that the combat is kind of like Dark Souls like rather than super arcadey.
Wow.
And I
Okay.
watched this extended gameplay demo this morning, and like it's worth watching, I think, if you're interested, because you get a much better feel for how the game might actually play. Because I feel like that first presentation is just all action, start to finish. Action and cutscene. That's basically it. Whereas this has like an extended sequence of kind of just walking around a hub area, and then an extended part where you were kind of doing some light platforming and puzzle solving in like an underground section, and and the combat also looks a lot more, like I said, a lot more kind of methodical and slower. It looks like you need to dodge and be more aware of countering rather than just sort of smashing everything to bits with a lightsaber. So after seeing that and hearing everyone talking about it from sort of the outlets who saw it and played it, I'm kind of tentatively more excited.
Now, obviously, mentioning the going a bit slower and problem solving and following a narrative and stuff sounds exciting to me. But the thing that stood out the most to me there was you mentioning the combat, and it being a lot more methodical and thinking about what you're doing. And it sounds like kind of the difference between what lightsaber battles were in the original films versus what they became in, say, the prequels. You know, how it was all flipping and throwing it around and really moving quickly, and it's a lot of flourishes as opposed to something that feels dangerous, which is exciting to me in a Jedi game. It's easy just to start feeling overpowered and to just sweep through the game from then. And like, I like the Force Unleashed games, but like, you never really feel like much poses a threat to you.
No,
So
no.
that sounds really good if I'm actually going to have to think about some combat.
yeah, it sounds like a far cry from where the original sort of lightsaber games came from, which is games like Jedi Knight and Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, and those were the games sort of that I grew up with in terms of Star Wars platformers. I haven't played the Force Unleashed, but I've heard, like you said, Timmy, that there's this sort of, you're kind of this unstoppable machine, and that's one thing that I'm more or less worried about in any new Star Wars game that comes out, that the lore takes a back seat to kind of the powers that your character has. I think that's one thing I'm really, really looking forward to, is seeing where the lore goes, but hopefully, it doesn't get too washed out by the actual gameplay.
Yeah. So maybe tentatively excited for that one. I still think we'll have to wait and see. Star Wars games have not had the best track record in the last few years, so cautious optimism, perhaps. Was there anything else that caught people's eyes?
I love the Luigi Mansions games. Obviously, that looks great.
Yeah, I think seeing
when
seeing that and more of the new Pokemon games, Sword and Shield, just sort of doubled down on my thoughts that the Switch is really it's a must buy now.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, like, I bought a Switch when I heard that that's where Pokemon's going, and I was kind of really hoping that we'd get a Luigi Mansion 3 one of these days, because that series is surprisingly excellent. I guess not surprising, like, Luigi is a flagship Nintendo character, but Luigi as a Ghostbuster is kind of like a weird sell in concept, I suppose.
Yes.
But those games are a lot of fun, and I feel like as a result, I feel like Luigi as a character has way more personality than Mario. Like I really, really like that character now. So yeah, I'm definitely up for that. I'll be honest, I didn't watch a ton of E3 stuff. Someone told me they watched a new Death Stranding film video and still don't really understand what the game's about, which is unsurprising. So I didn't rush out.
Sorry, go on, Timmy.
Oh, I was just going to say, and everyone kind of like lost their minds about the Breath of the Wild sequel announcement, but like it was kind of nothing. It was like it was like the equivalent of what they did with Elder Scrolls 6 like last year or the year before, when they just panned over a landscape and then it said Elder Scrolls 6 and everyone lost their mind. It was going on about it as if it showed literally anything. And like, you know what, like be excited about it, but like the trailer itself is nothing.
Right.
Like, let's not kid ourselves.
I guess the difference between those two is maybe that I feel like Elder Scrolls 6 was always coming because, they've made 5 of them, so we knew that was going to happen. Whereas I guess maybe a Breath of the Wild sequel was unexpected. That you might have just expected them to make another Zelda game unrelated to that. So I guess that was maybe a difference. But I have to say I completely agree with you that it showed nothing. There's no details. Like be excited that it's coming, but we know nothing.
Yeah.
I guess the only other thing that I thought of was that we didn't see anything really about the new Xbox, apart from them kind of confirming that it's coming, and Sony is obviously going to do the same at some point. I guess the only thing I wondered here was, do you guys feel like are you kind of ready for new consoles? I don't. I feel like the current consoles like Xbox One and PS4 are still really versatile and seem quite powerful. The games are still good. I just felt like I'm not in a mind space where I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to spend, a few $100s on a new console now.
It's round about the right time, right? I guess like the advancements in graphics are going to start like slowing down, right?
Yeah, in terms of years, it's the right time. But I guess I mean in terms of like the feel.
Yeah, okay. Like I agree with you. Like it's not needed in any way. Like I don't think. I mean, the one thing I would say is that all of the latest games that look particularly good, the fan on my PS4 is going bonkers. It's so noisy it sounds like it's struggling to cope.
Right.
I don't know enough about how those things work, but if the new one can run a bit more like it doesn't sound like it's going to take off or explode, then sure, I guess that's a plus. But yeah.
I think what we're just naturally going to see is consoles coming out a little bit earlier. Probably not until the point where it's like every year or every 2 years, but I think naturally over the past 30 odd years now, since whenever consoles have been coming out, there has been a slight sort of increase in how quickly they're coming out. And it's up to you whether you want to sort of count whether or not the second iterations of a console counts as that, like the PS4 Pro or the Xbox One X, which is another thing to take into account. Will they put in another iteration every time a new console comes out, regardless of how powerful it is?
Yeah, I think that second thing you said is really interesting. The kind of like the PS4 Pro, the Xbox One S and things like that. These kind of incremental consoles which get a little bit more powerful. That this is kind of a new thing, which I don't know. Which, like you say, is maybe like I don't know. Like I'm kind of confusing my thoughts here about it, but I wonder whether rather than these sort of big new consoles, we're going to get something like that. We're going to get like a platform, and then, like you say, maybe every year it gets like a little upgrade to it or something like that. I don't know. It's interesting because it feels like the years of sort of one console with no changes are well and truly gone at this point.
Yeah. One last question I had for you guys about E3. I just wanted to know your thoughts. Do you think Sony have said we're not going to do E3 this year because they want to do their whole own thing, and we're going to be faced with how like now Disney has D3 or D10 or whatever it is, so where they do all their own stuff with Marvel and Star Wars Celebration and all of that, and we're going to have to be going to different showcases 3 or 4 times a year, or do you think they've just gone, you know what, there's no value to us going every year. We're going to wait until next year and we can drop PS5 and all of these launch titles, and we're really going to clean up the competition rather than trying to have something amazing every year.
I It's a good question actually. I think E3 is becoming less relevant. I think like there's a possibility we just won't see Sony at E3 again. That like Nintendo are done, and they have not been at E3 in sort of a press conference sense for years now. They do their kind of online Nintendo Direct, often at the same time as E3, but they don't bother going there. And I wonder whether it's kind of reached a tipping point, and Sony have just decided that the benefits of, the benefits and the cost of putting on a whole press conference at E3 are no longer worth it. They may as well just run it themselves, save money, and just completely control the message. That's kind of my thoughts on it.
The thing is also that companies now can just put out what they want when they want, obviously through multitude of channels on the internet. Obviously it's good to have this big presence at E3, but then again, people are going to be just as excited hearing about something new, regardless of whether it's on Sony's website or their YouTube or whatever, even if it's not at E3.
Right, like that, the Cyberpunk gameplay demo that, they showed people at E3 that they're going to release to the public in a month or something. Like, I don't care where that comes from. I don't care if it's on a stage at Microsoft's press conference or whether it's like they just like drop it on CD Projekt Red's YouTube channel. It's like, for me as a consumer, it makes like no difference where that information comes from.
And I guess they also run the risk of, stuff they're trying to get in front of consumers' eyes being lost amongst the hundreds of other announcements and articles and demos and videos that are coming out all in the same 3-day period. If they wait a month and then do their own, all 10, 15, 20 games they're showcasing and their new hardware, people are going to be able to really absorb a lot better. So doing it separately isn't a bad idea. Perhaps it works better for the industry, with gamers being engaged about new things like quarterly, as opposed to waiting and having to choose who won E3, which, I always thought was a silly question.
Agreed.
Well, that sounds like a natural conclusion to our E3 chat. So let's jump into what we normally start with. We might have to cut this one a bit shorter, I suppose, because we've kind of gone a bit longer with E3 than we were planning. But what we've been playing this week, do either of you guys have anything you want to kick us off with?
Yeah, I have played Observation, which I talked about last episode as something that at that time I had just bought and was looking forward to playing. And yeah, I for once followed through and played what I was said I was going to play. And yeah, so Observation is basically it's hard to kind of define the genre. Maybe it's something like a walking simulator, but it is a near future sci-fi game set on a space station where you play as the AI on the space station. And it has very kind of 2001 vibes, with sort of you playing as the AI, a bit like HAL from 2001. And it's kind of narrow in scope and a bit mundane in a way that I really like. Like it's you don't sort of start off on a spaceship that travels at the speed of light to visit aliens all around the galaxy. You're just on a research station above Earth, and weird stuff happens. And I really kind of like that it's quite grounded like that. But it does get very weird very quickly in terms of the story. Which obviously I'm not going to say any more about because I don't really want to spoil it. But in terms of the actual gameplay, you play as the AI, like I said, and you basically interact with other crew members, or one crew member in particular who is on the space station. And you do this through security cameras that you can kind of possess and move around, and then spheres that you can fly through the space station. But most of the time you're using these security cameras. And it's really interesting because it's quite limiting the cameras pan really slowly and you're limited to where they can physically direct their view, and then you use those to kind of interact with more objects. And it's very interesting because it sounds limiting, but it actually works really nicely in kind of, making you feel like you're playing as a computer.
Yeah, that the limiting and the camera panning has immediately grabbed my attention because I know you're not much of a horror film guy, Paul, but it made me think immediately of Paranormal Activity 3, which is, in my opinion, the best of that franchise by country mile. And there's a really good scene in it when they set a camera on just like a pedestal fan. So it's like panning backwards and forwards, like slowly, and the tension that builds and the way that's used in the storytelling in that moment is really, really interesting. And I can imagine, like, if you're in control of that to some extent, but you can only do it slowly, and perhaps you have to, get all the way to one end before you can come back. I don't know how it works. You're telling the story here, but that sounds very interesting to me, and like it could be utilized really cleverly in moments where perhaps something's happening that you're trying to get a look at.
Yeah, there's I wouldn't say the game is a horror game, but it definitely has horror vibes at some points in the story. Um, and yeah, I kind of obviously like I don't want to sort of spoil any of the points in it. Um, and I don't know if the camera stuff is used. It's not used a lot in the way that you're talking about. The game is a lot of the time it's not particularly rushed. Like there's a tension to the game that is kind of building and building as you play through and discover more about what has happened and what is happening. And but it's no kind of time limit. You're never really put in a situation where you have to kind of rush to do anything, except for maybe one or two times. Now that I think of that,
Yeah. Have you ever played the game Soma?
I have not. But you have told me before about this one. This is like the underwater sci-fi horror game, right?
Yeah, so it leans a little
Great
bit more
game.
into the horror. But yeah, I think JT, you put me onto this. And I mean, it ticks all my boxes because it's sci-fi, it's horror, it's this little tight narrative. It asks some really interesting philosophical questions, and it had like a viral a marketing kind of what do they call it, ARG kind of
Mm.
site to promote the game. But a lot of what you're saying has reminded me of that game. So I was just going to ask if it's similar at all, but seeing as though you haven't played it, never mind.
Yeah. Unfortunately, can't speak to that. Like I said, it's sort of, I wouldn't call it a horror game, but there is a tension to it as it
Yeah,
unfolds that may kind of
yeah.
scratch that itch. Uh, in terms of the rest of the gameplay, apart from the kind of way that you interact with the world in terms of that movement, the other thing to say, I guess, is that it's kind of a puzzle game, but I would say it's very light puzzle solving. The puzzles are all quite easy. The solutions are very straightforward. Usually, you will find everything you need to solve a puzzle is in the room that you're in. You don't need to kind of
Right.
piece things together from all over the space
Yeah.
station. Not usually. I got stuck maybe once or twice on puzzles, but when I realized what the answer was, it was less to do with difficulty. It was more just to do with kind of poor explanation of how the actual puzzle worked. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't go into it if you're looking for like a challenging puzzle game. That this game is really about the narrative, and the puzzles are just sort of a way of telling the story. It's not meant to be a challenge. But when you do the puzzles, you are always interacting with various computer systems around the station, and this is one of the real high points of the game. Is the UI, the kind of in-game UI that you are interacting with, it is very reminiscent of the Alien movies, and in fact, they use the
Mm.
same UI designer who worked on Alien Isolation, the game, and so it has that
Cool.
kind of retro 1980s vision of what the future would be like, sci-fi, and so you are dealing with a lot of kind of monocolor displays with lots of kind of low resolution artifacting, physical switches and dials and things like that. It's not sort of, holographic touchscreens like modern sci-fi or anything like that. And this
And
really sells the setting, and it feels very tactile when you're kind of interacting with it as the AI.
I mean, like that feels more real to me. Like you said, like it was an 80s vision of the future, but that's that vision of the future has more in common with what our like the inside of our space stations look like now than like most sci-fi's coming today. And like sure the displays are better, you probably the monocolor displays aren't there, but the tactile switches and it being very like kind of like basic creams and browns and sensible colors inside these spaceships and stuff like that like absolutely to me makes it seem more real, even if it's not at all something that could happen.
Yeah, I think you're actually right there. I think what you're saying is probably more accurate. I think that I guess like the Alien movies were set hundreds of years in the future, and theirs was a vision of what hundreds of years would look like in the future. Whereas this is set, I think, in like 2023. So I think you're right. It probably is more like it's more like using that kind of aesthetic, but taking into account what space stations look like now. Taking into account that we do not have 3D holographic displays now. So if you take it 4 by 5 years, this is what it might look like with a bit of kind of retro styling. So yeah, I think you probably nailed it a bit better than I did there. But
Just quietly though, like Alien Isolation was an incredible game. I thought quite underrated and not least of all because of like the aesthetic of that. So that is a huge selling point if they've got one of the designers on there and it's like looking reminiscent of.
That game could have had no alien in it, and I still probably would have played it just as much because I reckon I was looking around in the environments just as much as I was looking out for the actual threat. So I died a lot, but it was great. I agree.
Hey, Paul, can I ask, offline between the last episode and this one, you mentioned having some real problems getting the game to run, to the point where you question whether this was a really meta game and you were meant to crack into the code of it or something. But it's sounding like you've had quite a bit of fun with it now. So was there something that you had to do, or is it just a real picky game? Like, what's the story there?
Yeah, you're kind of reading my mind here because this is kind of what I wanted to touch on next was the issues I had with it. In terms of this technical stuff, like you said, yeah, I had real problems initially. I had to reinstall the game twice. At one point, it reset its resolution to the lowest possible resolution available, which meant it was so blurry I couldn't read any of the text to change the resolution again. And I kind of had to trial and error my way through the menus to turn the resolution up. And in general, I would say that the game is a little bit rough around the edges. Perhaps if you play it on console, you won't face these problems. That's often the case. Playing it on PC, this is kind of the stuff you have to deal with sometimes. But it is a bit rough around the edges. Besides those technical issues, I did have some other small gripes with it. Like I said, you move around through cameras and movement spheres that you can kind of fly through the space station. The movement spheres can be incredibly frustrating to actually control and just to kind of orient yourself because you're kind of in space and it's a space station. There's no real up or down and it's very easy to get lost. So sometimes that was more frustrating than fun. And in terms of the narrative, it does get very weird with its story, and it doesn't explain everything, which I like. I like a storyline, whatever medium it's in, that doesn't feel the need to answer every question. I do feel like there are times in this game where it actually uses that as just an excuse to not make sense. If you know what I mean, it's not
Right.
weird because you don't get. It's not weird because, for example, the characters don't have the answer. It's weird because they wanted to do this specific thing, and so they're just going to do it and not explain why. And it's kind of like a narrative crutch that they lean on. So I didn't always love that. And then maybe just some little kind of bugs here and there that I had besides the technical issues. I had one issue where I very early on in the game I was kind of following the story and then I decided to just explore a little bit around the space station and I found an audio log which very clearly gave me information about the plot that I should not have at this point. and it answered a question that the main character had been asking, and I found this audio log, but the game didn't respond to this at all. So I, as the player, knew an important piece of information well before the game's story reached the point where it revealed it to me. So just kind of little things like that, like either that should have been unavailable to me, or the game should have adapted to that.
Were you able to use it to your advantage at all?
No. The game didn't respond in any way to the fact that I now knew this piece of information. It just continued as it did before. Like, the story of the game is, it is linear. There's no kind of choice involved, which is fine. That's completely what they've, the kind of game they've made here. But yeah, this was a little bit weird. I discovered something and was like, oh wow, so that's what has happened here, and then kind of went back to where where the astronaut was, who I was sort of working with. Went back there, and there's kind of no option to tell them what you found out or anything like that. And so that was, I don't want to spoil it, so I'm being kind of non-specific. But yeah, that was a little bit frustrating. Anyone who does play this, I had two tips that I kind of learnt through kind of struggling in parts of the game. Like I said, movement through the space station can be very confusing, and you can get lost quite easily, but there is a waypoint system that you can use, so I'd recommend people use that. And also, I had points where the game would ask me to do things. So it would say, for example, you need to go outside the space station and repair something, and I just could not find what it was I was supposed to repair. Then I realized that if you hold the interact button down, it does kind of like a radar sweep of everything you can see, and it highlights objects you can interact with. So just a tip for anyone playing it who is also getting stuck on that. It's the R button on PC. I'm not sure what it will be on console, but yeah, if you hold that down, it kind of lights up interactive things in the environment. But sort of in general, I really enjoyed it in the end once I got it working, and even with these bugs, go to it for the story and the atmosphere and the aesthetic, not for the puzzle solving, because it's not that difficult. And like I said, it's a bit rough around the edges, but there are definitely some like kind of holy shit moments when you play it. Like the first time you go outside the space station is very, very cool. It kind of captures the kind of vastness and isolation of space when you go outside. JT, you would really like it. It has the kind of moment when you go through the airlock where all the air is sucked out, and so all the sound sort of slowly drains out of the game, and then you go out into space and it's silent, and some touches like that which are really nice. So yeah, I think it's worth playing.
Cool. Great. Well, I'm looking forward to giving it a crack on console. I was excited when you mentioned to me that I could get it on PS4, and I'm assuming that it just won't have any of the bugs that you experienced being on console.
I hope so.
Because if it does, there's literally nothing I can do about it. So here's hoping. JT, what's up? What you been doing?
What have I been playing? Well, I mean, if I'm being super honest, and saying exactly what I've been playing, it's basically been Fortnite for the most of this week.
Oh, you're one of those.
Yeah, one of those non-purists. No, look, it's let's face it, it's really a bid for me trying to play the cool stepdad angle and get into making a father-son relationship with my partner's child. No, that's the excuse.
Hey, at least you're honest about it.
But no, it's it's a fun game. Like, I'm not going to say it's crap because there's kids everywhere in it. It's a fun game. It does the battle royale genre a lot of justice. Everything in it is where it needs to be. So
I don't think like kids being everywhere in that is like a problem at all. Like, I'm fairly certain I've had my ass handed to me by so many kids in that game. Like, they're good. Like,
here's the thing. I when I first started it, I was pretty good. I was on PC, which a lot of people will say PC players versus console players. The PC players always win because they're using a mouse and keyboard. It's more precise. My partner's son was first starting out, and I was wiping the floor with him. I mean, it was like no contest. Given 2 weeks of hit, given
He was 9 years old, man.
I think it was actually 8, but yeah, even worse. But giving him 2 weeks of playing it non-stop and me not playing it at all, now it's just insane. There's no contest in the reverse manner. I cannot get close to him, and he can do all this crazy stuff. Like, I'm not sure if you know, but in the game you can build your forts up. I guess that's why it's called Fortnite. But the manner in which people do it is just crazy now. They're running around, they're building like protective barriers out of wood as they're running and killing you. And like, I don't know how to do any of that, even though I'm on PC. And I actually feel like an old man who's like playing Call of Duty for the first time. Like, I actually get sometimes a little bit disorientated and like sitting in my chair physically, like, you know, almost motion sick from someone running circles around me. And so, yeah, to answer your question, Timmy, or, you know, to reiterate, the fact that there's kids everywhere in the game means nothing. They're insanely good at the game, or maybe I'm just really shit. I don't know. But yeah, that's what I've been playing for
just
most
quickly,
of this week,
just
because
quickly
there's
on
new
that,
season. So.
On that, JT, is it? You said you were playing with mouse and keyboard. Is it cross-platform?
It is. Yep. So
that's cool. I didn't know that.
I believe Xbox and PC were cross-platform for a while before PS4 came in, but now they're all intermingled. But the way in which that works is if you have a party that it has mixed input. So, for instance, when I play with my partner's son, he's on Xbox and maybe one of his friends is on PS4, or someone else joins a party there on PS4 as well. Because it detects multiple inputs, it won't put us in an Xbox only or a PC only. Kind of fair in that regard, that it mixes everyone together. Because I think if we were in a PC only lobby, it's safe to say that people would be going up against would probably be a fair bit better than most of us. So
yeah,
it's a good way to handle the cross-platform situation on that. The other thing that I have actually been playing is some people here might remember a game from yesteryear called Carmageddon, in which you drive around in armored cars with knives and things attached to them. I don't know. But it was like a game a long time ago that I used to love. But basically that got a Kickstarter to be remade into a newer game. So I've been playing the newest iteration of that called Carmageddon Max Damage. And it's been completely updated, new cars, new tracks, everything like that. And yeah, that's the other thing I've sort of been playing at the moment, only because I am going through my Steam library in alphabetical order so that I actually play the games that I have purchased in the past, because I have so many of those.
Yeah, I find this really interesting, JT. We've talked about this before, you know, off the podcast, because I have a similar situation. I've got sort of 200 odd games in my Steam library, which I think I've probably played at most 50 of, probably less. And I'm really interested in sort of the way you've been going through your backlog, doing it alphabetically, because my system has been. It's actually been helped by doing this podcast. I've been trying to play one kind of smallish game every time we do an episode, to have played one of these games every time. So this is stuff like Firewatch, Gone Home, these kind of like, you know, 4 to 5 hour games that I have quite a lot of in there. I've been trying to kind of cross one of these off the list every time we record. And that's been my system for getting through this. But you're going through alphabetically. I'm curious, do you play everything?
Well, yeah. It was daunting at first when I first sort of chose to do it, because I was like, this is going to take ages. There's some of these games don't look that appealing, but the fact is that, you know, I paid money for them. Even if it was like $1, or a lot of them are actually free because of Humble Bundle rewards. If you're on Humble Bundle, sometimes they'll just give out free stuff. But yeah, I have been playing all of them. Now, whether or not I finished them all is a different thing, because a fair few of them already I didn't really choose to finish them, because I feel that a lot of them aren't really my thing. But I guess the point is that I'm trying them.
Yeah,
At first, I was going to go through and try and do all the achievements as well. But then when you actually see some of the Steam achievements, they are unrealistically unattainable. Or
yeah.
They're completely unattainable. I
Yeah,
mean, for instance, in Age of
some of
Empires
them
2.
really do. Yeah, that's a good example actually. Some of the strategy games, they require you to basically like do everything possible in the game with every single civilization and, race, that kind of stuff. You'd have
That's
to play for
basically it.
hundreds of
Yeah,
hours.
yeah. For instance, I was when I was playing through Age of Empires 2, even though I played this game a lot before, I never actually really touched the campaign. So that's why, coming to it in my list, went through the campaign, started to unlock a bunch of the achievements, but then I was like, hey, what's this? Oh, there's 294 achievements in total. Some of them are like win 500 multiplayer games. I mean, that's just never going to happen because I'm not that great at the game, and I'm pretty sure everybody else online is going to be much better. But yeah, basically the system is that I play through each game alphabetically, and I've also got some other games that I might call staples. So as you know, I play a lot of Arma 3. There's games I'll still be going back to, so it's not like I'm exclusively playing this, one game after the other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of still going back and forth between some games I play a lot more.
Yeah.
So I've always got a few games I'm playing at the same time. So
Yeah, like I don't feel like there's any kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I don't feel like you're obliged to finish all of these. I think, if you bought it and you play it and you don't feel like finishing it, like that's perfectly fine. That's a reasonable thing to do.
That's
but
probably
yeah,
just the completionist in me. But,
yeah.
Yeah, but it gets to a point where there might be, like, for instance, there's a game, actually the very first game on my list that I got after I started this. So obviously I got it at some point, I think I was in the Bs or something like that. And then I got this game called 140 as part of a Humble Bundle. And it's a really, really nifty little indie platformer, sort of music and rhythm based. But it is, I can't even, it's like Dark Souls difficult. It's so hard. And so it got to a point where the frustration just, completely made the game not that fun anymore. So I kind of stopped playing it. But I'm glad I still played it. I think I got, what have I said? It says here I've played it for 85 minutes. It was free. So, I call that value for money.
Okay, so I was going to ask you like where your line is, like how long you feel you should play before you can guilt-free say this one's not for me. But do you kind of scale it based on how much it cost you? Like if it's a free game and you don't enjoy it after like 15 minutes, it's gone. But if you paid like $40 for it, you at least want to get a few hours. Like how do you judge it?
Yeah, that's a good question because I don't think I'm, sort of necessarily sitting down with a calculator and figuring out the cost and value. But basically, when it gets to a point that I'm frustrated, I'll probably stop playing most games. It takes a lot for me to get really, really frustrated in a game. I think when you and I were living together, Timmy, you remember hearing me throw the controller across the room when I was playing God of War 2 at one point. I still
dude,
that game.
Me and JT used to live with each other, and I just used to hear him saying the filthiest things upstairs, just like hearing controllers bounce off the walls and stuff, like those old God of War games. And it was just hordes of things, and the controlling wasn't as good yet. And it really put me off playing them, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, no, they were great games, and I was a different person back then. But, but basically, it takes me a lot to get really, really frustrated at a game to the point where I'm stop playing it. But a lot of these smaller indie games are actually quite difficult, which I think is cool. I think it's good that people are still releasing games that don't hold your hand. But at the same time, it means I'm probably going to put it down a bit quicker. So, but I'm now up to, where am I up to? I'm up to midway through, start of C, which is probably about 30 games, maybe close to 30 games.
Out of how many?
I wouldn't be able to tell you. There's probably a couple hundred here, I'd say. 200, 250 games. But I've finished most of those, and I did play through a lot of them. And a lot of those, I'm inclined to finish because I might have finished the first one. Like, for instance, I had Assassin's Creed in my library since not long after it came out, and I only just played it, I think, last year for the first time, and I did enjoy it playing it through the second time I tried. So that's now prompted me to go through Assassin's Creed 2. I just finished Brotherhood not too long ago, and like I'm really enjoying games now, which I used to pan religiously a long time ago, even though I hadn't really played them, just because of a crappy experience in the first case. But yeah, it's actually a good way. I recommend a way to just sort of slowly troll through your Steam library is to start from the top.
Yeah, and I think sort of in answer to Timmy's question before, like I think it depends on the game in terms of how long you kind of devote to it, Like if I'm playing like a big RPG or maybe a big strategy game, which are probably my two go-to big game choices, I do kind of feel like I have to give those kind of things 5 or 10 hours before I can really make a call. Whereas yeah, if it's a small platformer, I feel like you can probably give it half an hour and you can tell whether it's for you, that kind of thing.
I think yeah, touching on that, I think it comes down to a little bit in terms of what you're actually going to be missing out in the game. So, for instance, in this 140 game, it's just a platformer. There's no story. There's nothing in it of particular substance or detail. So, for me to stop playing this game, it's not really a huge issue. Whereas if I were to stop this in, say, a game like Witcher 3, if I just stopped it, think about all the stuff and the richness of the environment and the story that I'd be missing out on if I did stop it. So I guess that's kind of where I look at it a little bit too.
Right, yeah. No, I think that's a good point. There are some of those games where maybe it's like the gameplay and maybe the music and the visuals and everything are great. And if you play it for 1 hour or 10 hours, you're just going to get more or less of that thing, if there's no story.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, Timmy, you haven't said a lot about what video games you have been playing on your video game platforms of choice.
Well, you see, it's because I'm a teensy bit ashamed. You guys know me, and I've made no secret of it here on the podcast. That in many ways, I feel the advent of online multiplayer has been detrimental to video games in general, just because they're so much more popular that it means you get 1,000 battle royales and all the money going to like the next Call of Duty or whatever it is, so that everybody can jump online and shoot their friends.
It's funny saying, can I just jump in really quickly, Timmy? I just wanted to pitch a very, very cool idea. So this new movie coming out, I think it's called the Beatles movie. What's that one called? Where the guy
Yesterday.
Yeah, I thought it would be a great idea for a video game version where someone pitches the battle royale genre and no one's ever heard of it before, and he becomes really famous.
Still directed by Danny Boyle though.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's exactly it. Like, imagine if you could go back in time and like just beat Player Unknown to battle royale, right? Or just like finding a way to like patent or trademark the battle royale kind of gameplay.
Yeah, just draw a circle and then
I've never been big on online multiplayer, only because like I like the narratives and stuff like that, and like I guess it also comes down to just not being very good in a competitive setting in video games. But what I have been playing a buttload of is I have recently gotten back into Destiny 2. Now, this is a game a lot of my mates play, and they have a clan and whatnot. And so they often are talking about it in group chats we have. And then my girlfriend happened to be talking about it also. So it was kind of just front of mind. And then, there's expansions coming on the way pretty soon. I was going to be on the phone for a long while because my girlfriend lives interstate. So often we'll spend a couple of hours on the phone if she's got a big drive or something. And I thought, I just want something to like fiddle with, to like occupy my hands and my eyes, because otherwise I pace around my house for like hours on end and end up with sore ankles just from being on the phone.
If you've
And I
ever
was going to play Tomb.
if you've ever listened to any previous episode of Disc and Dice with Timmy on it, you have heard him pacing.
Yeah, I like
Yes.
all the times where like I cut out while I'm talking. It's because I've gone from good reception to bad reception within my own home. Um, But yeah, I was going to play Tomb Raider because, as listeners will know, I've been catching up on Tomb Raider, which I had recently dropped. But I figured there'd be too many cutscenes and different things going on. I wanted something a bit more grindy. Everyone had been talking about Destiny, so it was front of mind. I chucked it in. Turns out, like, my girlfriend really loves the game, and so rather than calling, often we'll jump on, like, we'll start a party together on PS4 and just chat while we're playing. Those mates I was talking about added me to their clan, so we had like team speak going and all sorts of stuff. And I have really been enjoying the social aspect of plugging away at Destiny, even when I'm doing the story, doing what I like, and I've like tried some PvP and doing some strikes and stuff like that. But I've really, really been enjoying Destiny 2, you guys. It's been so long since I got it on launch and I played a bit and I kind of dropped off. Um, I'm told now that it's really different. Like they've really made a lot of improvements since then, but I don't recall it well enough to know what those are. But the gameplay's great. The the online and multiplayer aspects of it seem really effortless, and it's easy to jump in and jump out, and pick something that you both want to do, or something hard that you need a bit of help with, or even just like chatting away, doing your own things. Been having a really good time.
Yeah, I haven't played Destiny 1 or 2, but I have heard similar things to what you are saying here about um, 2 really being quite a good game. That they sort of, they learnt from the mistakes and have produced something quite good with the second game. I'm interested, what do you think is different about this one? Is it like the people you're playing with? Is it because you have like friends who you play with rather than just randoms? Because, like you said, obviously you're usually pretty off online multiplayer.
Yeah, I mean, like, I suppose when the first one. Okay. Yeah, no, so I'm not into competitive at all. Even still, with my guys in a Crucible match or whatever, I'm just not great at PvP. But so I guess it's like knowing that I can still play with my mates and just you know play a story together. Kind of like how you'd squad up in the Borderlands games. So like consequently, this has got me really excited for Borderlands 3 now. I suppose it's just like through advent of my girlfriend, those guys, they're all still playing it. We're all on the same platform, so it's just easy. I guess I've just happened across a game that a lot of my friends are playing, and because you can play it cooperatively, I'm just really enjoying that. Um, but yeah, the game itself is really good, and because now I'm playing. Um, with people online, I've taken to using headphones, and I'm really appreciating the score and the sound design a lot more because I've just got like a couple of speakers next to the TV, right? I don't have like a U-Butte setup. And with the headphones, you really kind of get that surround kind of feeling, like sounds will move from the front to the back and stuff. And I'm really noticing a lot more care taken. So I'm kind of excited to play different games with the headphones plugged in now as well.
Yeah, on the sound thing, I've mentioned many times on this podcast that I am gaming on a laptop and have been for many months now. And because of that, because I live in quite a small apartment with my partner, and I'm often using headphones as well. And I actually bought a really nice set of headphones because I was using them so much, and I had the same kind of experience that going from laptop speakers, which it's a gaming laptop, so the speakers aren't awful, but they're obviously not amazing. But even going from using sort of like kind of like earphone type things to using full headphones, um, I really noticed the difference, and I started in the games I was playing really appreciating like the music and stuff and the score, those kind of things, but the sound design. So I really started appreciating just like the little things that are part of sound design, like the ambient noise and stuff like that, that often had just been, I guess I just kind of missed it because of however I was listening to it.
Yeah, like
I
I,
think
I
it,
was surprised. Like there were little things, like even just certain sounds that would happen when I selected things on menus and whatnot that I was just like, has that always done that? Like I was just like missing like massive parts because like I don't want to be blasting the speakers through my house. I have a housemate, like I don't need to have it up that loud. But now having everything in my ears and balanced, like it's something else.
I think you're going to get a big kick out of the Borderlands series, Timmy, when you get around to playing that, because it has great sound design. It's a very similar sort of game to Destiny.
Oh,
I think they've been compared
dude,
a bit as well. But
I played both of the Borderlands games already.
right,
like
okay,
when they came out, I played them on Xbox, so that's why I was saying I'm really looking forward to Borderlands 3 because, like I was saying, like now kind of appreciating online gameplay and having mates that I know on the same platform. When I played the original Borderlands, I was on Xbox, and most of my friends were on PS4 or PC. Sorry, PS3 or PC. So I played all of those on my own. I never squatted up with anyone at all.
what I was going
Now,
to quickly,
that's something I'm really looking forward to.
what I wanted to quickly ask him was, what are your thoughts on the actual soundtrack for Destiny? Because I've heard from Destiny 1 that it had a particularly good soundtrack. So if you're playing number 2, what's that one like?
So again, I wasn't really noticing it too much before the headphones, but last night I was really enjoying it. It is a very Bungie soundtrack, and I think you can say whatever you like about the Halo franchise, but you cannot like step to the soundtrack for those games.
That
The Halo
Halo
theme,
I was about to say that Halo
phenomenal.
main theme is phenomenal.
And like it's good like with the original strings and choirs, and then there's like the metal version. The freaking did they get like Satriani or like Steve Vai or someone ridiculous on that? Like it's so good. And like so obviously, sorry, that's not your question at all. The Destiny 2 soundtrack is actually quite good, and I'm excited to pay a lot more attention to it.
Speaking of Destiny again, as we sort of come back around to that, you mentioned that you were enjoying playing through the story with friends. What is the story like? Because I have heard massively mixed reports. I have heard some people say that the lore is phenomenal, and they sort of can't stop themselves from digging deeper into it and learning more about it. And then I've heard the opposite. I've heard sort of that it's super kind of generic sci-fi. So you're a story guy. So what do you think?
Okay, so I think the world building is really interesting, and I think that the lore itself is interesting, and the kind of niche they've carved in combining kind of sci-fi with fantasy, and there's a lot of stuff that looks like Earth and like the world coupled with really far in the future stuff, and also kind of like they've just slightly tweaked different species. So like I play as an awoken, and I kind of have like glowing eyes and blue skin and stuff, but it's still pretty much human. Lots of little things like that is cool. The stories themselves, like the narratives they're telling, I don't think are particularly groundbreaking, but I think the lore itself is kind of cool. Like the end of the main story in Destiny 2 ended with you kind of rushing through what is left on kind of the planet you live on, which I think I'm a little bit confused now that I'm trying to think about it as to whether it's Earth or the moon or a completely different thing. On the map, it's called the Traveler, but the Traveler's kind of floating in the sky. But like you're kind of running through like kind of a Middle Eastern looking bizarre like marketplace is what it looks like, except it's all skyscrapers. Like the whole planet is like Coruscant, but then it's all kind of like tents and stuff on top of those, and you can kind of make your way through the city in any way. So that kind of world they've built is really interesting. So I think the reason you're finding the mixed reviews there, Paul, is
Mm-hmm.
because I think the lore and the world building is better than the story itself.
Right.
So I hesitate to judge the main story itself too harshly because I played kind of 2/3 and then just stopped for like a year and a half, forgot it completely, came back and finished it off. But the couple of the first two expansions, which I've just played back to back, were kind of cool. Um, the Curse of Osiris was kind of like all Egyptian in appearance, and it was set on Mercury, which kind of had a lot of like pyramids and stuff. And the alien race that you're you're mostly fighting in that one is called the Vex, and it's all kind of biomechanical. And you had kind of like this massive, you went into this pyramid and through these portals, and you ended up kind of in like this simulated world, which they were using to train themselves how to fight different races and gathering information so they could be better in combat and become unstoppable. And that's kind of interesting, but it still all mostly boils down to shooting a whole lot of things, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There's not really choices, and there didn't seem like a lot of threat in that. You were trying to rescue a certain Osiris himself. You finding out what happened to him and whatnot. So again, not groundbreaking. Really cool to look at. Interesting concepts, interesting lore, interesting design, and that was enough to keep me going because Destiny is one game that I'm really playing for the narrative.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Borderlands in that it's just as exciting doing the grinding and the loot drops and like customizing this and look like changing everything in your loadout and your appearance, and then you can like color things differently and blah blah blah. But of course, Borderlands does have a really engaging story most of the time as well.
Yeah. I guess like from what you said about the story there, I guess in a game like that, good world building, I'm just thinking to myself, is probably enough because yeah, you're not really paying attention to the story beats so much. But if it's set
Yeah,
in an interesting, cool setting, then that's probably the box that I need ticked for that. You know, I don't need to have my mind blown by like some
hmm
narrative twist. I just need to have where the game is taking place to be an interesting setting.
yeah, and I think the one of the advantages that Destiny 2 had is that it took the central safe place and thing from Destiny 1, which you just really took for granted. The Traveler is like this big orb that like takes up the whole sky and the planet you're on and protects you all and gives you all your powers and kind of, you know. And Destiny 2, the first thing that happens is it pretty much gets stolen
Mm.
um, and damaged, and your entire the tower, which you is your home base in Destiny 1, is destroyed, and you're all kind of set up on this farm on Earth. Like it's just grass and barns and stuff. And when you've been playing this spacefaring sci-fi game, and all of a sudden, yep, the one thing that gives you all your powers has been stolen, and now you're on a farm. Like that's pretty interesting as a concept, you know. And
Yeah.
so yeah, like I said, like it's has it been done before? Sure. Is it still done well here? Absolutely. And if you're somebody that really gets off on lore and world building, there's so much for you to dig into. They really don't bog you down in it. It's not like you pick up a gun and it gives you like a page of dialogue about like this and this and this, you know, like you don't. But if you wanted to look into the history of this fictional corporation or this character or this sect of people, that information's there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, sounds interesting. Well, something else that I have been playing, which is also an online game, is WoW Classic. So we've mentioned this before on the podcast, but for those who are not aware, this is basically original WoW from I don't know how many years ago now, maybe like 15 years ago.
2004,
Yeah,
something like that, I reckon.
yeah, a very long time ago. And this is basically Blizzard are remaking original WoW and running servers that will just run WoW as it was 15 years ago. And I played in the 2 day stress test. So it's basically like a beta kind of thing over 2 days recently, where you're able to play up to level 15. You play as much as you want on as many characters as you want up to level 15. And I played that for quite a few hours and got up to just around about level 15. And I'm kind of disappointed to say that my impressions were very negative. Um, I felt like I guess I'm disappointed to say this because I know people are super hyped about WoW Classic. That this has been like extremely well received by the WoW community. That everyone is sort of all about this and says it's going to be amazing and stuff like that. And obviously, this is just my take on it from what I played, but I found it to be very, very slow and dated. that the game design felt 15 years old. All of the quests they're so simple. It's just fetch quests or kill X number of creatures. The actual kind of way they are designed within the world is very out of date. You have to do lots and lots of backtracking, and I felt like I spent so much time just running back and forward between places to hand in quests and get the next quest, which then needed me to run back to exactly where I was just before to hand that quest in. And so everything is slowed right down, like it was in WoW whenever it came out, 2004. And it just really didn't work for me. I didn't feel any kind of nostalgia for this sort of gameplay. I just felt like it was a grind, and WoW is always a grind. Even modern WoW, which anyone who listens knows that I have been playing sort of non-stop for many years. Modern WoW is a grind, but they've kind of streamlined the grind and found ways to kind of hide it. I just feel like the grind is in your face in this game, and it took me about 7 hours to get to level 10, I think it was, which is kind of insane. Like, I was probably slower than you could do it if you were absolutely min-maxing it, but I wasn't really kind of wasting time. And nowadays you can do that in about an hour or maybe just a little bit more. So yeah, that was really problematic for me.
As someone who got to play WoW just after, I guess, when did it come out? The Burning Crusade expansion.
Yeah, right.
So
the
I
first
didn't get
expansion.
to play. So I probably missed out a fair chunk of what you would call the classic world. That's a bit unfortunate to hear, but I guess you sort of in part answered my question. But what I was going to say is, you feel that even the newer expansions, even though it's still taking place on a dated engine, and obviously it's an old game, you still feel that the newer expansions sort of did the game a bit more justice than what this does.
Yeah, I think massively, to be honest. I feel like there are very good reasons that the game has changed in the last 15 years, and to have these servers where it is just reset to exactly how it was back then. Like just to repeat myself, there are good reasons why the latest WoW expansion does not work exactly the way vanilla WoW did, because you know we've learned how to design RPG quests better and how to design online worlds better and how to streamline things. We've learned like what is actually kind of fun and what is just a grind. And it's like this game is a return to a time when none of those questions were answered, and so half of it is still just kind of a mess for me anyway.
So it's interesting because the problem you're having, or your gripes with WoW Classic, is kind of that it is exactly what was advertised.
Right, exactly. And I have to say that I am not someone who was super excited when it was announced. Like, I think we've talked about it before on the podcast with a couple of people. Like, I was interested to try it, but I've never felt like I had the nostalgia for original WoW that I really wanted to go back and play it.
Was
But
the drive for this, like, the reason they've done it? I assume, like, because there were some custom fan made servers that were similar to this, but was the reason that people wanted WoW Classic because they feel like there's too much in the standard WoW, like it's too bogged down with bells and whistles? Like, why do people want this if it's so dated and I don't know, a drag?
I guess I kind of like. I guess I feel like, yeah, the reason it exists is for the reasons you said. There have been some private servers that they have kind of shut down, which ran old versions of the game, and I guess there is just demand among the player base. I don't know, I guess the reason is the same. In some ways, it's for the same reasons that, people will play a remaster of a game from like the original PlayStation era, but this isn't a remaster, It's literally just the game from 15 years ago. So possibly there is like, possibly people do just have like, I don't know. I've heard impressions of this which are very positive. I've heard a lot of people say that it's fantastic, like, this is what they wish WoW was still like. And to be honest, like, that's great. Like, if there are people who this is the WoW they want and it exists for them, that's fantastic. You know, like I'm glad that they can have the WoW they want and other people can have the newer WoW. But I guess because it's 15 years old, it's a bit like a remaster, like I said. But I guess it's also like, for me, it's still the same game. So if I play WoW Classic and it's not enjoyable, it's not like, well, I'll just finish that and move on. It's kind of like, if you play WoW Classic, you could just play that infinitely, or you could play the newer WoW, where, in my opinion, everything is better. I don't know if that made much sense. I was kind of talking myself in circles there.
No, I get you.
I think for me, what drew me into WoW when I first started playing, in much the same way Timmy's enjoying Destiny, is that social aspect.
Mm-hmm.
A huge part of WoW when I started with you was obviously going into your guild. There are a bunch of different people there. It didn't matter who was online. There'd always be someone to talk to and play the game with. But I mean, a lot of the time, you're talking about not even the game. You're just talking about real world stuff with the game sort of just taking place in the background, but you're still enjoying it. So are you still, do you, like, in this time playing it, do you still have a social element that you can attach yourself to, or is that missing? And do you reckon that's maybe part of why it's not as good? Or,
Well,
I mean, what's your take on that?
I don't have a social group that I really play WoW with now. I play with my brother every so often, but I don't have a guild that I'm part of. I don't play with any people. But the thing is, I've been playing sort of normal WoW, current WoW with the new expansion, loads for the last, like, I don't know, few months since the new expansion came out. I've been playing it heaps just by myself and having a very good time and enjoying it. So it's not like I needed the social aspect to enjoy WoW as it is now. So I don't know if that's
Right.
necessarily it. For me, I think one of the issues is I remember, like, this is kind of like a gaming story. I remember the first time I ever played original WoW because I bought it and I played it for 12 hours straight. And it was so incredible, and the world, I had never experienced an open world like this. Just, the sense of discovery was so strong as I would kind of, go over each hill and see what was next. And I remember kind of finding the massive dwarf city at the start of the game and just walking around outside it for like half an hour, marveling at how big it was. And because I'd never seen anything like this, the game was like so amazing. And when you strip away all of that sense of discovery, because I know all that stuff so well, I've experienced it so many times, you are just left with the mechanics, and the mechanics are 15 years old. And I don't know whether this is because I have recently been playing a lot of WoW, so maybe for someone who hasn't touched the game for 10 years, this is a massive nostalgia hit and they really enjoy it. But for me, who has been playing current WoW fairly regularly, like I just said, this just feels like a step back in every possible way.
And also, I mean, in those 15 years, how many times has a new game come out where you can have that sense of discovery,
Exactly.
constantly bettering itself, like there'll be Skyrim, there'll be, maybe people playing Elder Scrolls Online, or
The
Lord of the Rings
Witcher
Online, or
3.
The Witcher 3. You're going to have those senses, sort of reinvigorated every time. And then I guess to go back to original WoW, it's like you said, you get the dated version. It's not that great anymore.
Yeah.
So I can totally understand where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, that's everything you have said there is true. Like it's not just that WoW has come a long way, it's that like gaming in
Games
general
have
has
come
come
a
a
long
long way.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess my takeaway from sort of all of it is that it's anything you do in WoW Classic is going to take a really long time because it is super grindy, the quests are slow, the leveling is slow, you have to do a lot of backtracking. And, if you enjoy it and you have the time to devote to that, then by all means go for it. But I am already actually considering stopping playing normal WoW, purely not because I don't enjoy it, but just because it is such a time sink and I just want to play other games instead. And so for me, it's just like I cannot get behind the idea of a version of WoW that is even slower and even more grindy. So yeah, for me it was a bit disappointing that it turned out as it was. A bit disappointing, I guess, just for the obvious reasons. Like, a good game is more fun than a game that isn't fun. But yeah, I wasn't sort of hanging out for it anyway, so it's all good.
Cool. Well, lots there. We might take a quick break, I reckon, before we come back and have a chat about our main discussion topic for this episode. Okay, welcome back. So last episode, we mentioned that we were going to be talking about mobile games on this episode. And so I guess a good place to start, guys, is there a certain type of game or a style that lends itself to mobile pretty well? Or like, what do you look for when you were looking for a good mobile game?
So I guess one of the things that I look for is something that uses the uniqueness of that platform well. So something that couldn't necessarily be ported straight across to a mouse and keyboard or a controller, if you know what I mean. Something that feels like it needs the kind of touchscreen swipe everything feature of a mobile device. And as an example of this, I would mention a couple of the games that Timmy has mentioned recently, the kind of puzzle games like The Room or Birdcage, which I think, Timmy, you talked about last episode. At least Birdcage you did. And I have given those a go since we recorded then, and quite enjoyed the way that that they feel very tactile, because you have there are a lot of moving parts. You are turning knobs, you are kind of pulling levers, inserting and turning keys and stuff like that.
You're generally turning the whole what you're playing with. Like, you have 3 dimensions. It's like you're walking around a whole table and looking at it from every angle.
Right. And I think while that stuff is that kind of experience is transferable to to something like a PC, I think The Room is available on Steam and all of its various sequels and stuff like that. I feel like there's something really nice about playing it on a touchscreen where you are kind of touching the actual puzzle itself, where, like, the Birdcage I've actually played much more of than The Room. When you are kind of sort of zooming in and like turning the levers and lining various parts of the puzzle up, that it feels like you are kind of pushing pieces across the screen in that way. And I generally kind of really like that kind of feeling, the way that it uses the touchscreen and kind of makes or takes advantage of the fact that it's a unique control device.
Yeah, I'm really glad you've gone straight there, because these are my favorite games. Like, I play, like, any time there is a good new puzzle game like this, whether it's like escape a room or open a box or whatever it is, I absolutely eat them up. And I think The Room is the very best. It's like the pinnacle, what every other puzzle game aims to be at that series. So I'll come back to it in a second. But I wanted to talk to you about the Birdcage, just because I've recently played that also, Paul. And I messaged you in the week and you mentioned that you had loaded The Room and the Birdcage, and I was telling you how The Room's way better. Maybe don't even bother with the Birdcage. It's very simple, and I found, like, I just coasted through it. It was always obvious to me what the next thing to do was, for the most part, anyway. And you mentioned that you don't feel like you're great at puzzle games, and so Birdcage was going to be a good intro to those kinds of games for you. So I'm really interested. Did you find that really easy, or have I just become used to how these games play?
No, I did find Birdcage very easy.
Yeah, good.
I found it very easy, and I found that quite relaxing, and quite satisfying.
Still, wasn't it?
Yeah, which to be honest is maybe it's maybe not sort of the point of that kind of game. I don't know, maybe it is. Maybe the Birdcage is meant to be really easy, but I didn't feel a sense of satisfaction in terms of achievement from finishing, from sort of unlocking each Birdcage. I just felt a kind of like relaxation and kind of zen from the nice music and the nice ambient noise, and kind of just going through the motions and then setting the bird free. It was sort of like, that's the nice part of it. I just wanted to add there as well that The sound design is really great in both of these. Like I talked about how there's a lot of sort of turning of knobs and pulling of levers. There's some really great kind of like clicks and sounds as kind of, the gears inside the mechanisms turn, which I think really makes a difference. Like I don't know whether you play these games with the sound on or
Yeah.
just sort of, listen to music or podcasts or something. But yeah, I played them with the sound on, and I really enjoyed that when you're doing these kind of tactile motions, you have these really nice sounds as well that go with it. But yeah, from what you said though, I think I do want to give the room more of a go because as much as I enjoyed the birdcage, yeah, I didn't find it challenging in that sense, and I guess that is part of the fun of these kind of puzzle games.
The room can get very challenging,
Hmm.
but it has a good hint system where it doesn't cost you anything, and it's like timed, so you have to be kind of it can keep track of what the next thing you kind of need to do is. And after it's been, you know, I don't know, 5-10 minutes or whatever it is, you'll see the little question mark in the corner kind of lights up, and you can at that point opt. And even if it gives you a clue, it doesn't go do this to that. It goes kind of, it has 3 levels. And the first one goes, maybe it's something to do with like this piece that you have in your inventory, and you can kind of sort of think about, all right, so I need to obviously find something that matches that or look into it more closely. And then if you still can't get it at 10 minutes have passed, you click the question mark again, and it goes, I'm pretty sure that piece that I've been looking at is adjustable, and you realize, oh, I need to actually open it in the inventory and change it or whatever. And so it kind of gives you 3 levels, and so it kind of self manages the difficulty level
Hmm.
without ever just giving you access to them all straight away, which I think is good.
That sounds like a
Before
good
I go,
balance because yeah,
yeah,
like I've said, I don't think I'm particularly good at puzzles, but I don't necessarily want to just be given the solution.
no, I'm really stubborn with hints. I'll use them as a last resort. And I don't know if you use them in the birdcage at all. There are a couple of puzzles that I must have been like holding the phone funny, so it wasn't picking up my touches, and I
Mm.
thought I was missing something, and I clicked on the hint, and it literally just shows you what to do,
Ah,
and
okay, that's not so good.
it'll just keep going until you press stop. And I was just like, well, that's not what I want. Like, tell me what I should be looking at,
Hmm.
like, and give me a fighting chance here. But yeah, before I go any further into those, JT, have you played any of the Room series before? You seem to have in my head that you have.
I haven't. I've seen them pop up on, the iOS store, and I've been browsing the games, but I'm yet to actually grab one of them. So I think sort of hearing you guys talk about it now, I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, so
They've been really, really intriguing. I mean, they look like the kind of puzzle game that I'd like. They're not too sort of clinical and fuddy duddy. It's got a it's got that sort of like strong, almost horror theme to it. It looks
yeah,
like,
I
just
was
looking
about
at
to.
it anyway.
Yeah, I was about to say it's got a really interesting storyline that kind of doesn't explain everything, which I know all three of us kind of quite enjoy. And in that way, to me, it evokes a little bit of Lovecraft, um,
Right.
in
Okay.
some of its imagery and in some of its kind of like
Hmm.
your most of the room games is you're generally like the first one is it's kind of like a toy box, and you're just trying to open this puzzle box that has all these layers, and it starts off looking small, and then you get past the first layer, and it kind of unfolds into an even bigger thing, and then sometimes you'll get like sucked into it and be trying to solve it from the inside, and then once you've done that, you can come back out and get to the next layer and all sorts of things. And the first one's very simple, but then the second one, it kind of takes you outside that first room you're in, and you're in like the whole house or whatever it might be. And you realize this puzzle box that you're solving is somehow connected to this like omnipotent horror that is like threatening wherever you happen to be. And then like you're as well as opening these boxes and solving the puzzles, there's letters along the way, person that's tasked you with doing this, and it makes it seem very grave. And they strike a good balance without it being like the world is going to end unless you solve this dollhouse. Like it can be very dumb, but it's written very well. And this again, it's the sound design and the appearance of it, and it's just so slick. And the puzzles are so good
See,
that it's very easy to buy into.
That kind of story sounds appealing, but it leads me to one gripe I have with some of these games, which is this is a gripe that is specific to my situation, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. Like the birdcage in the room, yeah, they kind of have these hints of lore that are kind of scattered throughout some of the puzzles. If you make a mobile game, please give someone the option to change the language of the game in the game itself. And this is specific to me because I have my phone set to a language other than English because I'm trying to learn that language. But when I am playing a game like this, I want the game to be in English because it was written in English. It's like I want to consume media in the language it was originally in. And the birdcage doesn't let me do this. It just defaults to the language of your device. And the only way to change it off that is to change your whole device, it is not a huge issue. It is something that you just do when you reset your phone and it's done. But it's just annoying. It's just a little gripe.
Yeah.
Like I have actually started playing another game recently, and when it started up, it wasn't in English, and I just went into the options and changed it to English, and there we go. It was fine. And put that option in your games. All the mobile developers who listen to Disc and Dice, we know you're all out there. When you're making your games, put this option in specifically for me. End of rant.
It's a strange little oversight, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess maybe for a game like the Birdcage, you don't think language is an issue, but if you give me lore in your game, I want the lore. Don't tempt me with lore.
The lore in the Birdcage is all really disjointed and weird, if you ask me. In the first one, actually, it's all right. It kind of tells a little story that I didn't feel added anything. In the second one, it gives you lots of parts of spells and incantations and potions that mean nothing. I thought, I was taking notes initially because it looked like part of the thing, and I was like, this is going to come into it. And then they all mean nothing unless I have really missed something.
What if it's real magic?
Yeah, that's it. My mistake was only trying to use it in game.
Yeah, you had to pick up your wand and kind of spin it around.
So JT, those are puzzle games. Me and Paul have kind of gone on about those, and just before we move on, the Room 2, the Room 3, and the Room Old Sins, highly recommend. Worth the $2 to $4 each one of those is charging. Pay once, never have to pay again, and they're the best games I've ever played on my phone. But JT,
I just want to quickly mention before we go to JT, there was one other puzzle game I wanted to make a mention of, and it is called Framed. I believe it is made by an Australian developer. And I played it.
I've heard of this.
Yeah, there is a sequel, and I played it at PAX. It must have been at the second PAX because I think it was the first one that was at the bigger venue. And yeah, I played it there, and it is basically every level is a series of frames. And it's maybe a bit like panels from a comic book. And basically,
it's essentially each page of a comic.
Yeah.
Each level, yeah.
And yeah, it basically is. And in each one, what happens is from the top left, a character kind of starts running, and they are a thief who has stolen a briefcase or something like that. And they are running, and they run.
A spy.
Yeah, something like that. It's not so important, but they run from panel to panel, and the panels have different things like ladders or doors or corners they turn around and things like that.
Security guards.
Yeah, and you have to rearrange the panels so that they can move through them all and reach the bottom right-hand corner. So it's as if they are kind of moving down the page through each panel. And really, it is a puzzle game, is what it is, but it has this kind of wonderful theming of helping a spy to escape from security. And also this great kind of very minimalist aesthetic where you kind of just see silhouettes of people, and it's all kind of big blocks of color and sort of polygonal shapes everywhere. And it's sort of really nice art style, really nice kind of general vibe to it, and also a cool little puzzle game to boot, which again kind of has this sort of drag and drop mechanic, which feels really nice to do on a mobile device.
Yeah, and while at first it's like just get him from top left to bottom right or whatever it might be, by the end of the game, you have to like he'll start and then you move the panels while he's running. So like you can
Right.
swap one he's already run through to back in front again if he needs to go back up another ladder or something. It's really clever. And it's a really cool kind of like old school detective noir kind of feel, and it has a the soundtrack to boot. It's another one with really good sound.
Right. Noir is definitely the key word there.
Yeah.
Yes,
Puzzle games. They're the best.
they are.
JT,
So-
do you like
what
puzzle
you play?
games?
So basically, I I don't really have a puzzle game on my phone at the best of times. Probably the closest I've really had recently is actually a classic game that you might have played on PC a while ago. And this is kind of where I usually use my mobile for mobile gaming, is to play games from, classic yesteryear that have been brought onto the platform. In terms of puzzles, a great one for the phone that I've been playing is Myst. I'm not sure if anybody knows or remembers a game called Myst.
Dude, yes, I love the Myst
It-
franchise.
It came, yep. So the Myst. I'm not sure if Riven, which is the sequel, is out on it. I haven't checked yet. But they brought out Myst on, I think, Android and iOS is what I play on. I'm not sure if they brought it out on Android, but that is a great translation from that game onto the mobile platform. It works perfectly. It's great. It's almost like reading a novel in a way as well, because the very, very narrative kind of game, with little elements, I think, of what you might find in the room as well. It's got those similar sort of, you're searching for things to make something else work type puzzles.
Actually, quite complex
that's a great
puzzles in that one too.
Yeah, exactly. And some really, really cool, trippy environments too. So if no one's ever played Myst before, get it on your mobile, because it's probably the best way to play it these days anyway. So that's the one I've been playing.
I'll be really amused if Riven comes out on like iOS or Android, because I had that game as a child. Well, my parents had that game and I played it as a child, and it was one of those games that came on like 6 or 7 CD-ROMs. So like every time you went to a new area, it was like, please put in disc 3, and you'd put in disc 3 and you'd go to the thing, and then you'd get whatever you need and have to go back and you have to swap the disc over again. Just not knowing the difficulty and it having to be across all of these CDs, knowing that it can just fit in an app that's probably not going to take up too much space on your phone would be quite something.
I guess that's like the case with a lot of the classic games I see coming to mobile and things like that. Like, I think the original Baldur's Gate and maybe Baldur's Gate 2 are now available on mobile. And again, these are games that, when I think of them, they are enormous, 100-hour sprawling RPGs. And yeah, the idea that now, you can have that on a phone and play it is kind of baffling.
Not many people realize that Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is completely on the mobile. The whole game.
Wow.
And that is a massive game.
Yeah, I did not realize
massive.
that.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
So I think it's like $15 or something. It might be cheaper now. When I checked, it was $15.
How long is it going to be until they announce Skyrim for mobile?
I know, right? Yeah. Fingers crossed. Well, maybe that'll be the next Bethesda E3 thing. The next iteration.
It'll come out before Elder Scrolls 6. That's for damn sure.
That's right. But I think that's what I'm drawn to, particularly with those types of games coming onto the mobile platform, is that you get the whole game with no, I guess, what do they call it, like in-app purchases. You buy the game as it is, because how can they really cut a classic game up to resell it in smaller portions? And that's sort of one thing I noticed from developers releasing those on the mobile platform, is that you're pretty much always going to get the whole game. There's never usually anything else that you need to buy, so it's good. That's probably what I like the most.
Fair enough. Yeah. Before we move off of puzzle games, I was just going to say, Paul, if you like the the room games when you play them.
Mm-hmm.
I recently played a game called House of Da Vinci, which is I I played it and I had to check out whether it came from the same developer because they have just aped the rooms style so exactly
But
it
but
might
in a
as
good
well.
way.
Yeah. It's a well delivered game. It's not as cool a concept or story, but it's just a single game, and it's you're literally like an apprentice to Leonardo da Vinci who's gone missing because someone's chasing him for one of his inventions, and you have to get through all the different puzzles and traps and stuff in his workshop to
Uh-huh.
track him down. Um, I just wanted to mention it also because if you do want to play it, I had a real problem. You can download House of Da Vinci Lite, and it's like free. And then once you get past the first kind of area, it goes and now buy it for $2.99 or whatever. And I did, but for some reason it wouldn't remember that I'd already played that first area. So just pay the $2; it's worth it, and
Mm-hmm.
just like play it through. Not a very satisfying ending though. When it ended, I was like, "Wait, what?" Like I didn't realize the game was ending, and then it was done.
Yeah. Okay.
But the puzzles themselves, still a lot of fun. And if they were to bring out another one, definitely play it.
Yeah, I have to say I do. So this is kind of on a different topic from what JT said. I do like the idea of just paying and you get everything. So like a
Mm-hmm.
couple of the mobile games that I have really enjoyed have just been the kind of things that it's just like I say a normal game, but you know what I mean. It's just like a normal game where like they cost $5 or $10 or something, and you just buy them and that's it. You know, there's no ads, there's no anything like that. So yeah, I do definitely like that kind of model. It doesn't always work. Like for these puzzle games, I understand sometimes it's a bit different, but yeah.
I realized I kind of implied we were going to move on from puzzle games, but I have one more that I wanted to chat about because I kind of started playing this puzzle game series because I was like, I want to make sure I've got stuff to talk about this episode, right? And it was called Cube Escape. And it started out as like just this one kind of game, a little thing, pretty simple escape from a box or whatever. But there's like 10 of them, and they're all free, and they get really good, and they're all tied together with this world and storyline that seems very, very Twin Peaks to me. Like, kind of like to the point where you pick up a phone and there'll be someone who they've obviously recorded talking backwards and then reversed it so they're speaking forward, but it sounds weird, just like the little guy in the Twin Peaks room, you know? And it's all really weird and kind of gothic, but not really. And the villain might actually be like a corrupted version of you. And they keep bringing back imagery from all the past games. And I'm just playing these and they're getting more and more polished. And the callbacks are really clever. And I'm just flabbergasted that they're all free. Um,
This sounds
so
really
you just,
like this sounds really involved for
yeah,
for what are kind of puzzle games at heart.
absolutely. And sometimes they can get hard. And when, you know how you were talking about in observation, how sometimes they would do weird stuff and they just pass it off as weird stuff happens so we can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
That twigged something in my mind, and I didn't realize it was these games right now that I've started talking about it.
Uh-huh.
Because they're so surreal that often the way to solve a puzzle will be so out of left field that it kind of makes no sense that that's what you do to like open this drawer that's stuck, or it'd be like you have to do this to get to the bones of a fish to reorder its vertebrae to get them in the right order to unlock another cupboard. Like bizarre stuff.
This sounds
And
like the kind of
it's
point and click adventure games of the past on PC where
oh,
you have
like
to
Monkey Island, how you have to combine two bizarre things that you'd never combine to win somebody's love or something.
yeah, you've got to like put a banana in the toilet so that you get the chewing gum from the stove to like make a key to open the door or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, it sounds like that. which I
So the
don't
only
like.
reason normally no, the only reason this is okay is because they're much more narrower in scope games. It's not like you can walk around this whole island and you have to do all these things and talk to things. There's no one to talk to. Generally, you've only got a couple of things in your inventory that you're working with at any one time. So you kind of can tell that you need to be focused in on this area, and you just need to work out how to do it. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it kind of leads you to knowing what you should be doing at least. But yeah, sometimes they can get really tricky. But I was just amazed. Like literally, there's 10 games, and even the ones when like 6 games in, all of a sudden I was playing a game when I was Vincent Van Gogh's like loft, and I had to like do some of his paintings and stuff. And at one point, I looked in the mirror and I was Vincent Van Gogh and I had a knife. So I went, I bet I meant to cut off my ear, and I did. I cut off my ear, and then that unlocked all of this other stuff, and that was cool. And I thought, oh, that's weird. This one seemed like kind of one of the earlier games. It's not as polished and it's a lot shorter. But then in one of the later games, there was a picture, a painting on the wall of that same apartment, and I had to put the things back where they were meant to be in that apartment from having played that game. And I was just like, hats off to you guys. This is so cool. My only complaint was like about the whole franchise was I had to actually go to their website, and actually it was even hard to find on their website to work out what order you played the games in, because the App Store no longer shows the date it was launched, only like it was released, only the dates of like the last few recent updates.
Mm.
And so I played them in an order that made sense to me, and I don't feel like anything, but I played a few of them out of order. Luckily, it's so surreal and trippy that you can get away with mixing a couple of them. So I played them in pretty close to the right order. But dude, some of them even involve time travel, and you just open access to going between 4 different seasons and changing things in one so that it's different in the one you want, and then going back and changing it back. And they're incredible games for how simple they are. So Cube Escape is what they're called, and they're by a developer called Rusty Lake, which have been featured for their paid games like Rusty Lake Hotel and stuff in the App Store a few times, I've noticed. But these Cube Escape games is what I am about, and they're all free. So why wouldn't?
I feel like I'm not ready.
No, you're not. Dude, they're hard as heck. Like I had to look at walkthroughs a bunch of times, and you know that I hate doing it. So
I think I'll work my way through the other ones, and if I'm still craving, maybe I'll look at those. Hey, I wanted to ask you, Timmy, about puzzle games. Last episode, you mentioned a couple of games you were gonna have a look at, maybe, which were Agent A and Device 6. I was
I played.
I was
played
curious
neither.
Okay, all right. No, I was curious because I looked them up after the last episode, and they sound really intriguing. So, all right, yeah, I'll look forward to it in future then.
Agent A, it sounds like that's one that they are releasing more content for all the time. It's still pay once by the looks of things, but when every now and again they do a big update and you get a new episode because it's episodic. And I really had every intention of playing it, but faced with 10 Cube Escape games, all free, that I was really enjoying, I just wasn't finding the time to spend money on another one. And yeah, same thing with Device 6. I have it installed, and I kind of went back to it. Again, aesthetic really cool, design really cool. But I just absolutely got caught up on those Cube Escape games.
Well, there's a couple of others I wanted to mention, moving away from puzzle games a bit, because as much as I do enjoy those puzzle games, like I said, my big thing is kind of something that uses the device and the sort of the platform interestingly. And as many people would know, we are big fans of kind of the walking simulator type narrative game on disc and dice. And I quite like that kind of model when applied to the mobile game, the mobile platform. And I've played a couple of games like this, but the one I wanted to mention that I played recently is a game called Florence, which is made by an Australian company, and it is actually set in Melbourne, and has a lot of sort of landmarks of Melbourne in the game. So if you're either from there or you're familiar with it, then you'll recognise things. And this is kind of like, I wouldn't call it a walking simulator because that's kind of a thing that you don't really do so much on mobile. I'd say it's just more like an interactive story. And you basically play through the story of a girl in her mid-20s who is dealing with a bunch of the stuff that a girl in their mid-20s deals with, but it is mainly a love story. It is mainly about her meeting someone and falling in love. And then, the story progresses from there, and I don't want to give away details, but it's really interesting because it has, in terms of gameplay, you would say it has puzzles, but it almost doesn't make sense to call them puzzles because they are never ever challenging, and you would never have to look up any kind of guide. Often they have no correct solution. They are almost more like a creative exercise. Like you have to color something in, and however you color it in, it doesn't matter. As long as you color it in, you progress to the next point. And it's really interesting actually, because some of them use this kind of gameplay in interesting ways. And I'll give one example. I don't want to spoil other ways that it does it, but one example very early on is after the girl she meets this guy, and then it kind of shows them going on dates and having conversations. And the conversation mechanic is that it gives you an empty speech bubble and then a bunch of puzzle pieces that fit together to fill out the speech bubble. No words, just like a flat color. And so you just put all the puzzle pieces in, super simple, you just put them all together, and the speech bubble kind of, once you finish it, it goes up and she kind of says it. Again, there's no words, there's no dialogue, there's no anything. And, you just finish it and you go to the next one. But as it progresses and as she kind of has more dates with the guy, the puzzles get simpler and simpler to the point where at the end, you have the speech bubble and it is just two pieces, and you just put the two pieces in, and then finally it ends with the speech bubble is just one piece, and you just put the one piece in. And like for me, this is signifying the fact that she is getting more and more comfortable speaking to this person. That at the start, it's like conversation is like a puzzle. You are working out what you have to say to this person, what their interests are, what you have in common. But as she gets to know him better, conversation just becomes so simple that you just drag one puzzle piece into the block, into the space, and then you're done. And that's it. And so that's how gameplay works in this game. So there's no challenge to the puzzles. It's just supposed to kind of represent elements of real life.
So it's like storytelling as opposed to necessarily playing a game.
Yeah, but it's interactive, so it's a game.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, that's what I meant. Interactive storytelling. Like you're not, like you said, they're simple puzzles. You're not necessarily solving something, but it's representing something. And I've just looked it up while you've been talking, and that art style is gorgeous. I'm definitely going to check this out.
Yeah, that's the other thing I wanted to mention is that it has this like sketchy kind of hand-drawn art style, which is really cool. And probably the high point is the music. The music is absolutely beautiful, and it syncs really nicely with lots of the events in the game. To be honest, I probably should have looked up the composer to sort of name drop them here because they deserve a mention. But the music is phenomenal as well, and it's another one that just uses the platform really well. So for example, you have to kind of brush her teeth in the mornings and at night, and you have to sort of rub your finger back and forwards along the bottom of the screen to sort of move the toothbrush back and forwards, and just little things like that. The game's only about an hour long, so this isn't something that you play over and over like some of these puzzle games. It's just sort of a linear start to finish narrative story.
Speaking a bit also, Paul, about games that use the platform interestingly, and sort of in terms of the gameplay mechanics, have you, or you either, Timmy, heard of a game called Her Story?
Yes.
So this is sort of, I don't want to say similar in terms of that specific mechanic, but it's that same kind of interactive telling. But this one's sort of like it's meant to be as if it's like a true crime documentary,
right.
Except you're playing it through a desktop computer, like an old 1990s desktop computer, and you're trying to figure out basically this crime that's been committed. I can't really say too much because I haven't played much of the game.
You're watching interviews, right? And you have to kind of search for keywords based on the interviews.
Yep, and it's all live action interviews. It's all acted out in full in full visual splendor. It's sort of like you're watching interrogation tapes, and you're also trying to look up through different sorts of files and police databases, trying to piece everything together. And I think that it came out on Steam originally, I think a couple years ago, but then it's been ported over to the US and apparently works very, very well.
Yeah.
Well, having a look into both of them, they're both award-winning as mobile games.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I just noticed looking it up that the Florence is actually by Annapurna, which is a film studio, which is pretty interesting. Which I guess is why it's got such a strong storytelling.
Maybe it's
tilt.
maybe published by them, perhaps, because I think it's like by a very small development team in Melbourne is who made the game.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. JT, you reminded me then talking about Her Story. We were talking about E3 before. There was actually that studio who made Her Story have a new game coming out called Telling Lies, and it's the same kind of thing with live action video that you watch. And I think the idea is supposed to be sort of figuring out who is telling the truth from a bunch of live action videos and piecing together a puzzle from that. Timmy, I feel like these games are so up your alley that you should really be checking them out.
They sort of almost hinge on kind of the way that if anybody has watched it, the Bandersnatch episode of Black Mirror, in sense that it's interactive storytelling. Obviously, these are way more interactive, but it's very much that same sort of thing. It pulls you into it as if you're part of what's being told.
Okay. Yeah, and Paul, you're absolutely right. They're both on a list straight away. And this is the good thing about mobile games. They're both massively acclaimed, award-winning games, and Her Story is more expensive, and it's still only $6. Like that is, I can make myself a couple of coffees this week at work instead of going down to my guy, and and happily download that game instead. You know?
Exactly. So I had one more that I wanted to mention, which is something kind of different again. And this game isn't necessarily something that is kind of unique to the mobile platform, but it's called Game Dev Story, and it is a mobile game where you run a game development studio making games. So this is all very meta, and it's kind of like a pixel art game, and it's surprisingly deep for a mobile game, which is what I love about it. It has there are so many options of what you can do. So you have this small game dev studio. You get to hire your employees. You can hire freelancers for different jobs, and they all have different stats that sort of play into how well they make the games. And then when you make the game, you get to pick a genre and a style. So like genre is maybe RPG, style is fantasy, and certain genres link well together, like something like fantasy RPG. And then it has all these different platforms you can develop for, and they're all analogs of real life platforms. So there's things like the Game Kid, which is obviously meant to be the Game Boy, and they kind of come and go over time. So you can develop for a platform, and then they release the Game Kid 2, and so the number of people playing the Game Kid 1 drops, and you have to be kind of constantly adapting to this and moving to the newest platform. But it's expensive to get a license for a new platform, so maybe you develop on something like the PC, which is an open platform initially. And I've played this game for years, kind of on and off, and every time I come back, I sort of like I role play it a bit and decide like, all right, I'm going to be a studio that only makes PC games, or I'm just going to make kind of, handheld games on the Game Kid or whatever. And I'm always just blown away by the depth that is in this little mobile game. The end goal is to win Game of the Year. So at the end of every year, there's like an awards ceremony, and if you win Game of the Year, you kind of finish the game. But I don't think I've ever won Game of the Year, because it's just like there's so much to do in the game. And so I guess this is kind of like a simulation game on mobile. And yeah, I come back to this one all the time. And it's often the kind of one that I decide at like 8 o'clock at night, oh yeah, I might just start up a game in Game Dev Story. And then I find that I play it for like 4 hours straight. So it's maybe not a good thing, but it's a really nice little game.
That actually sounds really, really interesting. Does it have much in the way of like a narrative, like an overall narrative? Like, do you get to the end of your development story, or is it kind of one that you can just like keep restarting and kind of more like a Sim City kind of manage your assets and stuff?
I think you have 15 years to win Game of the Year, and after that point, you can continue playing for as long as you want. But the idea is that if you win Game of the Year in 15 years, you kind of win the game. But it doesn't have any real kind of narrative to it. So you start off with like I think a 4-person studio, and eventually over time you can expand it to like 8 or 10. I can't remember, and then you can sort of hire new staff. But sort of how you go about that is up to you. There are certain kind of events that happen, but they're not really story. They're just things like console launches, or there are times where you have like there'll be like some celebrity developer who sort of enters the game and you can hire him for your company if you want and things like that. But there's no real story to it. It's sort of very open end. You just kind of, do what you want, making games in a game.
That's not unlike Bandersnatch either. Like, trying to get a game of the year, like the
That's
highest
right.
rating game being the objective.
Yeah. I think I played one similar, Paul, but I'm not sure if it was Game Dev Story. It was something similar called, maybe it might have been called Game Dev Tycoon. I'm not sure, but
there is one on PC that is like similar to this, but it's not the same game.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, right. I'll have to check this one out.
All right, JT, I reckon it's your turn.
Okay. Well,
hit us with it.
So I'm just wondering, with regards to mobile games, how do you guys go with the control schemes? Because I'm on the fence about how involved I can get into a mobile game if its controls are kind of rubbish, because it's not having, the haptic feedback of, say, a controller where you can actually physically press the buttons can sometimes throw me off. How do you guys go with that?
I guess one of the things that like I said before, kind of, I like when they use the platform well. And exactly like you say, you don't have the feedback of pressing a button. So I like when they use mechanics like swiping in really interesting ways. I don't mind like a tap on the screen as something you can do, but that idea that you can kind of, draw on the screen with your finger or swipe in various directions. I prefer it when a game makes use of stuff like that. So like something like Florence that I was talking about, the narrative game, it does a lot of this stuff. It uses the platform well. But on the other hand, there's something like Game Dev Story where it's all taps. You're just tapping on the screen. Really, you could play that on a PC and it would be fine with a mouse. So I don't always need it to be like that, but I do kind of really appreciate it when it uses the kind of unique aspects of touch, which I think, pressing the screen is not necessarily unique because it's just like a button.
I think it really depends on the type of game, JT. Like we kind of already spoke about how the puzzle games we like really lend itself to it with the dragging and the, sometimes it's a double tap, sometimes it's pinching, etc. But for example, I love racing games, but I really don't like them on mobile, and I've never found one that's very satisfying. Like the only ones that you really feel like you can have control over are the kind of ones where it's always going forward for you, and you kind of swipe left or right to avoid obstacles, right? The other ones that kind of try to put like, they have images of joysticks in the bottom corner and you can kind of move it around. I never feel like it's properly responsive. It's too easy to slide straight off of it and not realize until you're careening into a wall kind of thing.
A big problem.
There's so many racing games as well. I don't understand how the appeal is so big on a mobile,
The big problem for me with racing games, or I guess most games that require more than just sort of the simplistic inputs Paul was talking about, is that your fingers are covering the screen.
Yeah.
And it throws me off completely. I tried to play Fortnite on the mobile just to give it a go to see if I could, and it's nigh on impossible for me. And I'm someone who, can adapt to most control inputs pretty easily, but it was just impossible. I mean, I can't see the things I'm shooting at. I can't see where I'm racing on the road. That's where I love having just dedicated buttons. A must for me if I'm going to do it.
I think that thing, specifically what you mentioned there about covering the screen, is like a big thing. that I've played mobile games before. I can't think of any examples where it's like you have to use like the bottom third of the screen constantly as like buttons to press for, that's where the controls are. And it does sometimes feel like, well, what's the point of this? Like if you've given up 30% of your real estate on the screen just to have your controls, like the whole point of this platform is that you don't need to do that. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a big sort
That's
of
right.
off-putting thing for me.
I often think you run the risk of changing what the game feels like as well. Like, and for many games, that changes the appeal of the game. Like, I am a huge fan of Tetris. I could just sit there with, like, the space bar and the arrow keys and play hours upon hours of Tetris. Shift key if you're playing with the hold function, right? And so when good versions of that come out on mobile platforms, I always give them a look. But more often than not, it's like you can't get to the really top speeds and then still play because you're having to drag it all the way across. It's not just pound, 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 and hit it in. Like, you have to drag it across, but then you also have to tap on it to rotate it, and so you can't move it and rotate it at the same time most of the same time, unless again you play it landscape with the buttons on either side, and then all of a sudden you have a much smaller screen. So I guess I know some people I've spoken to, and they're like, "Oh, it's exactly the same." No, you play it, and they see no difference in how you would normally play Tetris, and that boggles my mind.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why those games exist for the much more casual players who, maybe they just play it without the speed increasing. They play a very casual game version or something. But for me, with the traditional version of speeding up as you hit higher levels and whatnot, it just becomes unplayable past kind of like, your level 7.
Yeah, as someone who's been playing a bit of Tetris on DS recently and I'm not particularly good at it, so I'm not hitting what would generally be considered high levels, but sort of pushing myself in Tetris to get to higher levels. And how much you do have to do exactly what you said. Everything happens at the same time. You have to be like moving across, rotating, and then dropping blocks, and then kind of instantly doing it with the next one. I can't imagine how you could do that without it all happening at the same time.
Yeah, and that's just one example. JT, you were mentioning that you've been even playing Carmageddon on mobile somehow as well.
Yeah, the Stainless Games released the very first Carmageddon on mobile, and I snapped that up a little while ago, but it's actually a game that I can go back to pretty often. Surprisingly, the controls work very well in that. They don't take up too much of the screen, and they're not cluttered. You're sort of pressing the thing you didn't mean to press all the time. So I find for some reason that game quite easy to play, but it might be because it is a pretty clumsy sort of racer. It's meant to be clumsy. You're meant to crash into things. You're meant to hit other cars, and you're not really meant to stay on any kind of track. So that might be why that translates a bit better.
Do you guys ever played those I don't even know what the genre is called. They're called like endless runners. The ones
yeah, like Temple Run.
Temple Run.
Like
Yeah. I played a bit of Temple Run like back in the day, but never a huge amount because I just found it a bit repetitive. Have you ever got into that kind of thing?
I got into specifically Temple Run and Temple Run 2 like quite a bit, just because of my competitive streak and the fact that through the iOS Game Center, it was pitting me against my brother, and he was really into it at the same time. So he'd have messaged me and be like, "Hey, I beat you at top score," and I'd be like hell, you have. So then I'd get in there, right? Again, I stopped because they were repetitive, and it's also one of those ones that like it often felt like once you got to a certain speed, it was very difficult to be able to simply swipe fast enough to avoid some of those, right? I guess that's with the reason I like puzzle games is I prefer games that don't require constant and immediate input. Like, I like to be able to play for a bit and put it down. Those games where it's like, or if I needed to look up at something, I could do that and my game's not affected. Like, hunched over a phone, doing this for as long as I can, and then if someone rings the doorbell and my score's gone, right? Like I kind of get over those pretty quick.
Yeah, that's a good point. I always enjoyed those games. Always looked quite good as well.
Those ones did, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, there was a really good Spider-Man version of that. It was like an endless runner, but like you could jump and swing, and there'd be enemies coming at you as well that you had to kind of like web up while you were running. And you would unlock different versions of it, many of them from the actual comics.
Oh, that's quite cool.
So like, and then when they did like, for example, I think it was when they did like Spider-Verse, they like in the comics, right? Not Into the Spider-Verse, not the movie that's just come out, but like the comic event from like 4 years ago or so, they would introduce a couple of suits from that, or then they'd do one like there'd be a Venom arc, and so they'd introduce whatever current Venom was in there. So that was kind of cool as a comics guy. But again, it was the same thing. Like it got very tiring. You always start at the same point again, so you'll have a good run when you get really far, and then you can pay to like continue from there. Or if you don't want to spend money, you start back at the start. You kind of go, it took me so long. I guess I just shut the app now.
Yeah. In terms of those temple run games, there's a kind of a game I always thought would be pretty good. What exists on mobile is the monkey ball games, which is sort of like an endless runner, but you would use the tilting mechanic of the phones to actually control your little monkey ball. I'm not sure if you guys remember monkey ball.
I do, yeah. And
Nintendo, yeah.
And I didn't even think of tilt as a mechanic to use there, but that's a great idea for that.
I know some racing games have tilt, but it's a bit clumsy. But I think monkey ball would be perfect for it. So maybe that's something to check out if you want to, have a go at that kind of mechanic.
Okay, cool.
All right. Well, that is about all we have for mobile games. I know I've got a couple on my to play list that I'm still looking to get to. So I think maybe we'll still be talking about them from time to time in future. And Timmy, I'm interested to hear about those two we mentioned before that you had talked about.
The Agent A and Device 6, or
yeah. Those are the ones.
Cool.
So yeah, I'll be looking forward to hearing those. But we are going to take a real quick break, and then we'll be back to talk about what we're planning to play in the next month.
Games.
So, as usual, we are going to finish off here by just briefly having a bit of a chat about the things that we are planning to play in the near future. So, guests first, as maybe we sometimes do. JT, what are you looking to play?
Well, I will be continuing the Assassin's Creed storyline with Revelations. So, Brotherhood got finished not long ago, so I'm keen to get into Revelations and see how the series continues. I guess probably on the side, I'll be finishing off Stardew Valley because I used to play that religiously, and I stopped, and there were some updates. So I'll be getting back into that. And coming up next on the alphabet in Steam is Crusader Kings 2. So I don't know how I'll go with that. Paul was just mentioning not too long ago that it's pretty full on.
Yeah, it's
so hopefully I don't have to watch too many YouTube tutorials just to get into it.
Yeah, if you need to, I can link you to a few. I'm interested to hear how you go with that actually, because we have actually very early on we talked about that kind of stuff in grand strategy on the podcast, and I have, apart from games like Stellaris, the kind of real big historical ones I've sort of bounced off because they're so complex. So yeah, I'm interested to hear how you go with that one, JT. And to be honest, I'm also interested to hear how you go continuing on with the Assassin's Creed story, because I quite liked Revelations. I really liked the setting, being set in like it's Istanbul or Constantinople. I think it's maybe the most interesting setting for me that they've done. Maybe not the best game, but I really loved that city.
Yeah, I think this is probably the one that I'm most interested to start up. Brotherhood was great, and I heard great things about it, but I'm looking forward to the setting in this one. So we'll see how it goes.
You also get like what's the
A
character's
conclusion to
name?
that trilogy.
Oh yeah,
Ezio.
Ezio. You get like grey hair Ezio at some point in there as well
Ah,
because
cool.
he's
The
aging.
silver fox.
Yeah, he's the real
Nice.
silver fox there, and yeah, it's good stuff. Timmy, what about you?
So I'm probably going to continue on with Destiny 2. How specifically though, I'll probably purchase Forsaken, which is like the big paid for expansion. So I played like Curse of Osiris and Warmind, which were the first two, and I kind of got them for free with the last update, perhaps because they've been out for a while since I've come back to it. But yeah, Forsaken, I'm really looking forward to it because that unlocks like new level caps and a bunch of new classes, sorry, subclasses and stuff, and a whole bunch of end game things that I can't do yet. Like there's a game. What's the word I'm looking for? There's a play style called Gambit, which a lot of the guys in the clan do, and they really enjoy that. I can't play with them yet because I haven't got Forsaken and finished that and all that good stuff. So, and Forsaken is the storyline that everyone talks about being really good as well. So I'll definitely be sure to report back in, re the narrative v lore debate we were talking about,
Hmm.
because I'm expecting big things because I've heard big things. But of course, anyone getting to the third expansion of Destiny 2 and the one that you have to pay for is probably pretty invested. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And apart from that, I'm going to play a couple of the paid games by Rusty Lake, who do those Cube Escape things. I'm in the middle of one at the moment, and I don't love it half as much. It uses some of the same characters and styles from the Cube Escape ones, but it seems very disjointed from the actual story. Not loving it quite as much as the Cube Escape series, but I'll keep going with them because they've earned my favor with those other games.
You're learning your lesson for straying too far from your puzzle games.
That's it. Oh, this is still a puzzle game. Sorry, I should make that very
Oh, it's
clear.
still a puzzle game. All right, okay.
Yeah. What about you, Paul?
Well, I likewise I'm looking to keep playing some of these mobile games. Actually, it's sort of piqued my interest a bit with us kind of focusing on it for this episode. So yeah, I'm going to keep trying some of these puzzle games we've talked about. And there's a narrative game called Bury Me, My Love, which I have been wanting to play for a long time. And apparently it is an interactive story, but it is told as if you are receiving text messages, which again is sort of perfect to play on mobile platform on a phone. So I don't know much more apart from that because I've been told to kind of try and avoid details of the story. But I'm really interested to
So
see
what's
how
that
that
game called?
Bury Me, My Love.
Okay.
Add that one to the list.
Absolutely. There's been a couple games like that I've played before.
Mm.
Like there was a Mr. Robot tie-in game.
Ah, okay.
Um, and it was kind of like it treated your phone like a phone you were hacking, I think, or like a phone you were using to hack other devices. And it
Okay.
was kind of like it was that kind of timed as well. Like you'd get a notification and it would look like a text message. You'd open it up and it'd be whoever saying like we need to go now, and you'd kind of like do the hacking or whatever. And it was actually really good as far as tie-in games go. It stood up on its own legs, and so I'm interested in this.
Yeah, well, yeah, hopefully I'll be reporting back next month about that one.
Hmm.
Besides that, I am going to play To the Moon, which is another kind of uh, very short game, which I have on PC. Regular guest on the show, Moz, is a very strong advocate for To the Moon, and he's been nagging me for months, if not years, to play this game. So it's only a few
I've
hours
heard good
long.
things.
Yeah, so I'm going to give that a go. And besides that, I've been playing a whole lot of Total War recently, which we didn't have time to talk about on this episode. Maybe the next, I guess we'll see. But I'm probably going to continue with that. I've sort of really got back into that because I think I mentioned this last time. The new Total War has just come out, but my laptop can't run it. So I've been going back to the old Total Wars to get my fix. So I'll probably be continuing to do that while I'm kind of high on the Total War hype.
Cool. Well, that's gonna about do it, I reckon. If you guys had any questions, comments on what we've spoken about, or wanted to get in touch for whatever reason, perhaps you've got something you'd like to hear us talk about in a future episode, we are on all of your major platforms, just as Disc and Dice. So you can search Disc and Dice on Facebook or go to facebook.com/Disc and Dice. We are at Disc and Dice on Twitter, or if you want to send us an email, you can send that to discanddice@gmail.com. So thank you, JT, for joining us. First time, hopefully not the last time.
Anytime. Back anytime you want me.
All right, we might have to take you up on that.
Yeah, we'll hold you to that.
What we'll do is we'll record the month after next episode right now. So if you've got another few hours just like handy, don't go anywhere.
The thing is, I actually do. So, be careful what you wish for.
Paul, my dear co-host, thank you once again.
Thank you as well, Timmy. It's always a pleasure.
No worries. And thank you guys for listening. Once again, feel free to hit us up if you've got anything you want to say or ask. Otherwise, you'll hear from us next episode. Games.
Games.